Welcome back to another special edition of Shit Got Real podcast. That's REEL, where my co-hosts discuss movies and shit. In this episode, we have a returning guest who has an illustrious career in documentary filmmaking, as well as writing for well-established pop culture sites, magazines, and so forth. And according to AI, is a contributor to Poptic Nerve. Fans of horror, sci-fi, and nostalgia are obviously familiar with his work, mostly from the successful In Search of Darkness super documentaries. Who is here to talk about In Search of Darkness 1995 to 1999. Welcome back, David A. Weiner.
Hey.
Hello, Dave.
It got real, and here I am. And boy, if people knew what went on behind the scenes to make this happen, they'd say these two guys are old and pathetic. We straddled the analog and the digital, and here we are trying to defeat AI one click at a time.
That's right. And if you're within reach of our voices, you are part of the resistance. So I couldn't help that. So Dave, tell us about your second and final installment of In Search of Darkness 1990, and what more can we expect?
Well, so we are currently in a pre-order campaign for In Search of Darkness 95 to 99 that runs between now and June 9th at midnight. If you go to 90shorrordoc.com, 90shorrordoc.com, you get your name in the credits, you get your swag, you get your physical copy, you get a collector's edition. Check it out. I'm not going to do a listicle now, but you'll see there's all cool stuff. And not only that, but you can get the previous In Search of Darkness 90s, which is 90 to 94. You can get a copy of that, or if you already have it, you can get a slipcase for both. I'm already in pitch mode, but I like to sort of get that out of the way because we are currently doing a pre-order sale, and you can help indie filmmakers like us get it over the line, and it's a quality product. But the In Search of Darkness movies, for those who are unaware, are long-form documentaries about horror. I did 3 of them for the 80s, and now we're doing the 90s, as you mentioned. And so I am currently in production on 95 to 99. And so if the first half of the 90s was all about horror collectively just trying to find its footing and its identity in the wake of the overly awesome 80s horror golden era, what you have by the second half of the 90s is it's found its sure footing. And it's going in kind of a multitude of directions, but of course, Scream grabs the spotlight as the major influential film for so many others in terms of teen-driven, meta-fueled cinema. But you have all sorts of other cool stuff, you know, the dark, dingy movies that everyone wanted to be like Seven, or you have J-horror, or you have a variety of other movies that were extremely unique that really kind of pulled the rug out from under you with endings or expectations versus reality, whether it's From Dusk Till Dawn or The Sixth Sense or The Blair Witch Project.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I know there was like a questionnaire a while back, and I believe I submitted something like horror anime.
Oh, yeah, horror anime. Yeah. Well, so are you talking about the survey that we did?
Yes.
So what we love to do is reach out to the horror community to take part in this process and fill out a survey. We of course pay attention to what people are saying on social media, but we absolutely, for all of these documentaries that we do, long form documentaries, is we welcome audience suggestions and participation. And it's not editing by committee. But to me, as the writer and director of all these long-form documentaries, it helps really shape the type of material that people want. So, for example, I don't know if you use your real name, Mr. Poptic Nerve, but Mr. Poptic Nerve.
Oh, my main name, Stalk Eye.
Okay, there you go. So Stock Guy was one of the survey contributors. And so, yeah, horror anime. First of all, I want to acknowledge that it's a cool thing that happened in the 90s, but I don't like to reveal too much about the movie just because it's in production. And things are always changing. But I would say that I think anime would fit nicely in the fact that we are talking about J horror. And J horror, of course, is not all just live action. Anime absolutely is incorporated in that discussion. But the way we divide these documentaries up is we have individual films that we do segments on that are curated within each year. And this will be, of course, 95 to 99. And then there's larger context chapters. And so I think anime would fit well in a larger context chapters. If you have one particular movie, Stock Eye, that you think is like worthy of a segment, by all means, tell me now. But, I can't make any promises. I just, my problem that I have with all of these movies, these documentaries, is there's so much. It's overflowing with all these amazing movies and these amazing projects, whether it's TV or whether it's film. And so I can only include so much, and sometimes it has to be a nod versus a full segment.
As for animated featurette in terms of horror, one of the obvious choices would be Wicked City. There's the 3-parter OVA, which is more like science fiction horror, Genocyber. I won't say Yurasu Kodoji because that's
right. Listen, I'm gonna draw a line with hentai and
yes. But here's the funny thing. So I'm gonna make it short.
Hey, hang on. Sorry, I apologize to interrupt, but when I say draw the line, I'm talking about for my documentary. All hentai, just send my way through a DM.
Here's the funny thing, D. Back then, I saw this poster in New York, and it says "Legend of the Overfiend." I'm like, oh, it's a horror anime. So,
yeah,
when I managed to purchase the tape, because that was during the anime boom in the mid to early 90s. I purchased the VHS tape from Central Park Media, and watching it with my girlfriend at the time, and she was like, "What the fuck is this?" I had no idea it was hentai because I don't follow, that particular genre, because
that was your hentai baptism.
Yeah.
Hentai. I'm not actually sure how.
Hentai. Yeah, and she was making fun of the actors' voices, like, "Oh, Sukiyaki."
Well, then I'm sure you're familiar with La Blue Girl and things like that. It's that's a whole dark, spiral that anyone is welcome to check it out as long as they're open-minded with the type of material that will genuinely shock you and titillate at the same time, arguably.
Yeah, I could
Wait,
go.
I thought this was a Japanese hentai anime conversation. I'm in the wrong channel.
Hey, I try not to keep it boring. All right.
Oh, and I keep on interrupting you, but you actually have the distinct honor of being the first person ever on a podcast that I've been talking to who has hentai has come up and the discussion went there.
All right, that's definitely a first.
Yep.
Poptic Nerve breaking new ground.
Distinguished honor.
What inspired you to focus on horror documentaries in the 1990s, and how did the era's cultural or cinematic landscape shape your work?
Ooh, One of the reasons why, well, after we literally did 3 trips to the well to 80s, and believe it or not, there's still movies that are still unmentioned and untouched. But after 3 long form documentaries, we just decided it's time to move on to another decade. And going back to our audience and the horror community, a lot of people were very, very, very vocal about the 90s. And for some of us who were a little older, we're like, well, maybe the 90s wasn't as exciting as the 80s. But, it's time to sort of break new ground and go at least one direction, either forward or backwards when it comes to tackling a new decade. And the cacophony for 90s horror was pretty substantial. And, I think I, like many folks, when they look back at the 90s, because it's overshadowed by the 80s and other decades, the classic universal 30s and to the 50s, really, of universal horror and hammer horror as well, and contemporary horror as well. There's just so much great stuff, and I think people memory hold the 90s a little bit. But when you start paying attention to what came out, there's a huge, huge wealth of material, whether it's studio films or indie films or shot on video or straight to video films. I found that there was a challenge, especially by breaking this decade up into 2 halves, where in the first half of the 90s, I could kind of dodge the spotlight stealer of Scream and focus on horror trying to find its legs and define itself in the first half of the decade. And I discovered a lot of stuff that I had not heard of before, or I had heard of, but I had never watched. And I was reminded of so many of the things I did watch, especially whether it was in the theater, whether it called itself a thriller, but, essentially it was horror, or whether it was, stuff from my Friday night and Saturday night stack from the video store, the local mom and pop video store, Jungle Video, which I don't know if that's still around anymore. Probably not. I guarantee you.
Probably not, no, because streaming took over everything.
They're all gone. I once ran into Todd Bridges at Jungle Video.
Todd Bridges?
In Venice, California. There was Todd Bridges. I'm like,
Willis himself.
Yeah, Todd. What's Todd renting? Oh, I see he's in the hentai section. Okay. No, Todd. Sorry,
I know. You could resist.
Todd Bridges did not do that, so I don't want to slander Todd's taste. But then again, why not? There's nothing wrong with it. But anyway, I've derailed my entire story with Todd Bridges. But there was a lot of great material that I rediscovered and was happy to explore again and revisit and add to this story. But I think culturally, the 90s really represents a variety of different things. When people really pay attention, there was a huge amount of material that was all over the map. But of course, the big takeaway is a meta-fueled filmmaking, So even in the first half with Wes Craven, from People Under the Stairs to especially New Nightmare, yes. Wes Craven was really mining this sort of self-reflexive look at horror. But you could even look at like Jason Goes to Hell by Adam Marcus, where there's all these amazing Easter eggs, for horror fans of movies that aren't Friday the 13th movie. It says Julia Carpenter on the crate, but it's from Creepshow. The Necronomicon is what Jason Voorhees' mother uses to resurrect him as a demon. There's fun stuff there. And so by the second half, when you're getting Kevin Williamson involved and writing Scream and Wes Craven's directing that really, of course, changed the direction, because very specifically, not only was it incredibly innovative, but Hollywood was paying attention, and Hollywood was seeing big box office numbers. And so teen-driven horror, teen slashers really came back with a vengeance in the wake of Scream and The Craft, which came the same summer before Scream came out. Mm. So I would say the big cultural takeaway was meta-fueled, filmmaking, where if anything, collectively, horror directors and writers were looking to cater to a more sophisticated audience that was expecting more than just the tropes of horror. They wanted to play with the tropes of horror. And I think that's one of my biggest takeaways, or collectively all of our biggest takeaway from that decade, if you want to sort of grab one main defining defining characteristic. And last I'll say is that I think to this day, movies are still mining the 90s and its meta approach, because I think that's what horror audiences oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes are expecting and hoping for.
Well, great answer as always. And speaking of the craft, I actually, to me, that was more like a successor to Carrie in some bizarre way. But
I'll just speak really quick on The Craft. I think The Craft is really a great film because it's not a scary movie per se,
no,
arguably, but it's a great teen film about friendship and
revenge,
and revenge and comeuppance, but also teen politics and teen friendship politics, and the outsiders, getting their revenge. And I think you could you mentioned Carrie, The Rage, Carrie 2 is a great movie to revisit. That came out in '99. And that's a great movie. It's a great movie, even if you take out the Carrie connection and the telekinetic, requirement, which of course is a great, that's the great culmination of that film. But you could just take that out and just look at it as a movie about high school and sexual politics, and it's inspired by the Spur Posse, which was a real life thing, of football players and their game to, sleep with as many girls and rate them as possible, and the effect it had on the women that were the victims of the Spur Posse. This is kind of reflected this is reflected very transparently in this script. And then add, not a wallflower, but kind of a goth cool kid version of Carrie, played by Emily Bergel. And you have the recipe for a really good film that I think a lot of people might have overlooked when it first came out.
I'll definitely give it a second look.
And Amy Irving is in it to connect the original Carrie with this Carrie, playing the same character, Sue Snell. So it's pretty cool. Go ahead.
When you mentioned Jason's,
Jason Goes to Hell.
His theory of the being resurrected through the Necronom, that one, it has a lot of weight to it because it will tie into the Evil Dead universe. Which unfortunately they never tapped into. Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm interrupting. Go ahead.
My theory, even back then, when I was a kid, I figured like Crystal Lake itself would have some type of mystical properties. Maybe it was like a Native American sacred land, like whatever. And I brought them back. It was far-fetched, but I'm like, there has to be an explanation of why.
I'll take
indestructible.
Yeah, I don't know. I yes, some people want some explanation. Other times you don't. I don't know. I kind of go with. We've seen so many horror movies ever since, say, Halloween. Where Michael Myers, you believed he was a normal, at least in that movie, just a normal guy who was, obviously very screwed up and very hard to beat and kind of indestructible, but you didn't think he was anything more than human. It's not until that final scene, after those, I think we're past the spoilers on that one. He gets shot, he goes off the balcony and he's lying there when you think it. And I remember I don't think in my life until that point, because I was young, I had never seen anything like that. It was like, holy crap, he's gone. And that was the moment where you're like, you start thinking, is he like supernatural, superhuman? And then the movie ends. And I loved that because I loved how there was no explanation. But, as sequels go on, the writers feel the need to explain because otherwise it's the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over. But I think collectively, I'm using that word a lot. Collectively, when I look at a lot of horror movies, I really enjoy not knowing why. That to me, the what if rather than the answer why is much more intriguing to me, just as a audience member.
True. And I definitely concur with what you said, that the ending of the first Halloween, to me, is one of the biggest mind fucks in cinema.
Yeah.
One story.
Come on, he got a hanger end in the eye. You know, if that happened to me, I'd be like, fine, you win, and I'd stumble away. You know.
All right. So,
sorry, I digress. I'm. It's my job to throw you off all your questions that you have, and go down tangents and rabbit holes about hangers and hentai.
Well, hangers, that's what I'm gonna name it. Hangers and hentai.
Hangers and hentai.
Funny. Okay. How did you approach capturing the behind-the-scenes stories of 90s horror films? And most importantly, what challenges did you face when getting filmmakers and or actors to open up?
It's a good question. After doing a lot of these documentaries, this is literally the sixth one I've done for Creator BC. If you include the trilogy of 80s, 90s, and In Search of Tomorrow, which is the 80s sci-fi one I did. The nicest thing about all the interviews that we do is that we invite the talent, whether they're in front of the camera or behind the camera, from that era. When they do they sit down with us. It's not like we catch them on a red carpet or at a convention or like stop them on the street. You know, we arrange for a sit down for a minimum of an hour, ideally. And so they go willingly with the intention of talking about what they, their projects and the era. I do tell them ahead of time that we're going to talk about other movies and other things. And sometimes they're like, yeah, that sounds great. And they want to spend a lot of time on that. And other times they're like, Heather Langenkamp, where she's just like, David, I don't think you know me as well as you think you do. I don't really like horror movies. Adrienne Barbeau. Adrienne Barbeau said the same thing. Sorry, Heather Langenkamp. But Adrienne Barbeau was the same way. She's like, David, I can barely remember what these movies are about, but I remember my experience on the movies. So, you sort of navigate the strengths and the weaknesses in terms of memory and what they want to talk about in terms of their own personal experience. So like for Adrienne Barbeau, for example, we had a great long conversation. We talked, I think, almost for 2 hours. But the idea was you can't just say, well, what did you think about this thematically or that thematically? Or what do what's your favorite scene, or your favorite kill? Oftentimes they're just like, frankly, David, I just don't quite remember, but I do remember this. So you got to change your tack, you got to change your approach and your strategy to appeal to what they intrinsically know and feel and remember, And so for Adrienne Barbeau, for example, it's a lot about the acting process and the evolution of her career from stage to TV to screen, And, she responded extremely well. And we had a wonderful long conversation, and inevitably I sort of veer back and I say, the marketing of, I don't know, Swamp Thing, do you remember this? And I literally had my Swamp Thing DC movie adaptation and I held it up to her and she's like, I've never seen that before, So, it's like, I didn't know they made a comic. Was this recent? So, nothing, that's just her perspective, So when I sit down with a lot of these folks, everyone is different. Some people are just like a wealth of knowledge, like Joe Dante or Caroline Williams. Other people, they're like, well, it's very specific to my experience and my perception of things. I had a great conversation with Andrew Devoff, the Wishmaster himself.
Oh, yeah.
For In Search of Darkness 95 to 99. And, I throw movies his way, whether it's some Wishmaster sequels or he wasn't in. I think they did 4 Wishmaster movies, but he only did 2. And sometimes you never know if he's going to want to talk about 3 and 4, or like say, yeah, that's not me. I don't want to talk about that. He's a kind of an open book and very appreciative of his place in as a horror icon of the 90s. And all I could say collectively is that usually when you talk to the villains of these movies, they're the nicest people in the world.
Nice. And you're very fortunate to have a 2-hour discussion with Adrienne Barbeau, another one of my on-screen crushes next to Pam Grier. I definitely love her as Maggie from Escape from New York.
Yeah,
she was a badass.
Well, I'll humble brag and say that we shot that particular interview at my house in my backyard, because that was during the tail end of the pandemic, and we were shooting outside to be able to get these interviews to happen, and we could sit close enough without having to wear masks and stuff like that. And so I had kind of a cavalcade of celebrities at my house for In Search of Tomorrow mostly, but also for some In Search of Darkness. But I can list names. But CEO Robin Block of Creator VC, he's always saying I should put a plaque at my house listing all the famous people who were there. I mean, I've got John Dykstra, Bruce Boxleitner, Adrienne Barbeau, Gail Ann Hurd, Walter Koenig, Chekhov from Star Trek. Alex Winter, Flash Gordon himself, Sam J. Jones. I even had Deep Roy, if you know who he is. Anyway, so lots of really, really cool people. I had
John Carpenter.
I haven't had John Carpenter at my house.
No. Okay.
But I've been to his bungalow multiple times. He has a bungalow, like a Hollywood office that's like a bungalow, and that's really fun to be at. So, because he's got all sorts of I'll say one good thing. See, I'm already derailing all your questions. One cool thing was when I was at the bungalow was he had this. He has a lot of his awards, like his Saturn Awards and Chainsaw Awards and other great accolades, all on his mantle, on his fireplace there. And one of the things on the mantle was this looked like Creature from the Black Lagoon, but not exactly. And I said, what is this? And he's like, oh, that's the Creature from the Black Lagoon from the 90s version that I was going to do. But
I remember that one.
Didn't ultimately make. And, it was a maquette. It was designed by Rick Baker. So I got to hold that thing and take pictures with it and be up close and personal. And to me, that is one of the absolute thrills of getting to do this. Not only do I meet my horror heroes, but I get to hear some stories of untold, unmade films that I like to collect. And if I have enough really good ones, I like to put them in my documentaries. So we'll see what comes up in 95 to 99, but who knows? Maybe there will be something about that.
Yeah. And to tailgate on that answer, what was the most surprising or unexpected story you uncovered while researching or filming your documentaries about 90s horror?
I try not to tease too much about, because also just for clarification, and I think you know this, but I just like to say it out loud, is that I'm still in production. And so I even if I want to put something in, I can't tell you if it's going to end up, even if I was just saying, and we were talking off the record, I still can't tell you if it'll be in it at the end, because I make the movie, and then I usually shave probably almost an hour off of it. I usually go like 6 to, you can include this, when I'm making these movies, my rough cut usually runs anywhere between 6.5 to 7 hours. Sometimes I just go over, despite careful planning. Segments run longer, chapters run longer, and I include segments that I ultimately have to cut for running time. So even I do not know what I'm going to end up at the very tail end, what my documentary will include, because I have to make really painful cuts for running time. And I still have many segments that I've made in the past for all 4 In Search of Darkness documentaries, and I had like 15 left over for In Search of Tomorrow as well. And so it pains me to have to cut it out, but for running time, believe it or not, even though we're in the hours for these things, you know, for editing and for space and for Q&A and for, you know, legal review, all these things like that, you've got to trim this stuff back. So much to my chagrin.
With so many horror super docs like RoboDoc and the Blumhouse stuff, which to me, of course, borrowed from In Search of's templates, do you feel flattered, as in it's a compliment or competition?
Well, I don't know if I'm going to say that I definitely did not pioneer. Well, I don't know. Maybe I did. I don't think
you did. Yours stand out the most.
Well, they might stand out the most due to repetition and audience appreciation in terms of more, longer. But I will always do a tip of the hat to Never Sleep Again, the Elm Street documentary, which covered the entire franchise, and Crystal Lake Memories, the Friday the 13th long-form documentary, which I think was about 6 hours long. And so those two really gave me permission to be able to look at one decade and do a super doc of 4.5 hours or more, you know, and now we're up to 6 hours when you look at In Search of Darkness 90 to 94, when you include the end credits. And so there are plenty that have come after me that are very similar in terms of the talking head format, talking about subgenres and everything like that. But I mean, I don't know. I can't take credit for anything. You know, we're a pretty straightforward documentary in terms of the talking head format and clips to support it and that kind of stuff versus like a narration, like watch the horror filmmaker as he decides, do I have more blood or less blood? Like, we're on the set now. Wes Craven, he had a challenge. You know, we don't have any of that stuff. It's the people who are there talking about their experiences. And I guess what is somewhat unique about the In Search of Darkness movies is one of the things that I think set us apart was we were, if not the first, one of the first to say, let's take a look at the 80s and the 80s alone and do a deep dive into that. So I think that kind of set us apart at the time that we did this. I felt like that was unique, even though there have been, you know, Eli Roth's History of Horror and so 101 Scariest Moments, I think it's called. You know, all these documentaries that had come around the same time, if not before, with a lot of the crossover with a lot of the same folks. I don't know. I just remain humbled because I don't think I pioneered anything, but I do believe that we did make quite a dent in focusing on one decade, and also having the people who are responsible for the material that we love in that decade, not only talking about their projects, but talking about their love of other people's projects during that time as fans. And I think that formula, whether we're doing movie by movie or a larger context chapter, special effects, or the zeitgeist of the era and how the films reflected that, I think that format and structure is something that a lot of people respond to because it's so long, it still flies by. Of course, courtesy to Samuel Way, who did the original trilogy and In Search of Tomorrow, and now Alex Townley, who's doing the 90s versions. Sam is off doing Aliens Expanded and The Thing Expanded. So those guys really, really rocked when it came to pacing and making these movies fly, and the music. Weary Pines did the music for the 80s trilogy and In Search of Tomorrow. Dream Invaders is doing the 90s. I claim very little credit. I maybe between Robin Block and I, we can orchestrate the ultimate teams to get these movies made. The smaller the team, the more you can accomplish, believe it or not, in a short turnaround time. So I'm not sure if I did answer your question, but I do think
Yeah, you did.
I don't look at RoboDoc and say they owe me, you know.
I noticed quite a bunch of similarities between those other documentaries and the In Search of stuff. So
Yeah, well, I think it's a winning formula. Let's go one step further with it. You know, as I'm sure you remember, growing up, sitting in, like, you know, science class watching some documentary, you know, it's like an episode of, you know, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, you know, that cheetah waits to pounce, you know. It's like,
oh yeah,
you know, this is interesting for 5 minutes, but, you know, can we go back to that dated movie from the 50s about sex ed, where the girl's on the phone and says, I can't go out, I've got the curse, you know. But you know, documentaries have evolved to a point, you know, you could even credit Michael Moore for changing up the documentary format to being much more entertaining,
yes,
and very controversial and informative, but take a very serious subject and injecting lots of humor, real humor, and a bit of a satire as well to engage you. And of course, Ken Burns, you know, his stuff is a little more dour and straightforward, but he pioneered these like hours-long documentaries. I have been in the past by certain people called me the Ken Burns of horror documentaries.
Well, that's fitting. That's a good compliment.
That's an absolute compliment. I do not put myself on the level of Ken Burns, but, you know, I might, you know, give Ken Burns a run for his money for at least the running time of my documentary,
among other things. And Michael Moore, he definitely revolutionized documentaries as well, especially in Bowling for Columbine,
Roger and Me, you know, Fahrenheit 9/11, all these movies that, you know, I don't often go see documentaries in the theater, and those were like appointment viewing, you know. So yeah, you know, it's one of those things where I think the documentary format not only has evolved over the decades, but I think the audience that loves my documentaries and RoboDoc and, you know, History of Horror and stuff on Shudder and whatnot, the movies that made me, right? You know, sorry, the toys that made us, and then, you know, I think they did the movies one.
Yeah, they did.
You know, those are very digestible. They're very fun, and they're sort of niche documentaries that are appealing to a select audience that wants to know more about our favorite movies. You know, I love Just Desserts, which is all about the making of Creepshow. You know, it's like if you love that movie or a topic, and there's a all-encompassing documentary or stuff you've never seen before. You know, I'm loving it's a documentary about ILM. They had a first season, now there's a second season on Disney Plus, and now I have to look it up, but it's
Industrial Light and Magic, right? Yes.
Yeah, give me 2 seconds, but that's an amazing, that's up my alley big time, especially because when I went to In Search of Tomorrow, or when I did In Search of Tomorrow, I got to go up to ILM, and I got to, you know, talk to them and shoot at their studio or at their theater there, and, you know, yeah, that was like a dream come true. Light and Magic.
Light and Magic. As part of the creative process, who selects which submissions make the cut during the end credits?
Yeah. Who selects it? Wait, you want me to name names? You know,
no, you don't have to.
Because then they'll be the target if you submit it.
Yeah, I know. Oops. No, it's funny though. I asked just as the ball breaking question because I actually submitted a video of me in Misfits Crimson Ghost makeup. You probably will recognize me if you've seen it. Well, mine's went over the top, a little satirical, especially when I did the Wakanda salute, rest in power, Tony Todd thing.
Did you wear? Did you wait? Were you or did you wear a mask or something?
No, it's me and makeup.
Oh, okay.
Like
Sorry.
the Misfits, one of my favorite bands, the punk band Misfits, who
Oh,
had the
okay.
Crimson
Well,
Skull thing, or me trying to look like the Crimson Skull, and I had a hood over my head, Ghost in the Hood, get it?
all right. Well,
Play on words, but
listen. No, I can never make any promises to anyone, but I encourage you to go to submit again.
well, I mean, after putting on that makeup and trying to wash it off, I don't think I can. But
Oh, it still hasn't washed off, huh?
yeah,
Yeah. Well, what
I still have the dark circles around my eyes from the
for
makeup.
those not entirely clued into what we're talking about is at the tail end of we've started doing this, I think, with In Search of Darkness 3. The end credits, we invite the backers and the horror community to send in a video talking about their favorite movie or their favorite subgenre or why they like In Search of Darkness. You don't have to brown nose to me. You can just talk about why you love the era. Seriously, you don't. It gets at a certain point, I start discounting the ones that say In Search of Darkness is the greatest thing since sliced bread, because it's too self-aggrandizing if I'm constantly putting in videos saying we're great, we're great, we're great.
Right.
But anyway, ultimately it's really great because we get to have the voices of our audience, which what these movies are all about, the audience and the community, the nostalgia and what these movies mean to all of us. So it's really awesome. And we plan to do that again when the time comes. We'll have, if you follow our social media at 80s Horror Doc, you'll be able to, at a certain point, we'll put out a call for videos and submissions.
Oh yeah, I definitely encourage fans to submit their videos. It was definitely, like I said, a lot of fun making them, from my behalf.
That'll probably be, in and around September or October that we do.
Well, I can name a few horror submissions, but that might be too political considering what's going on nowadays.
Yeah, we'll keep it to hentai.
Yes.
I now have to find out what the pronunciation is.
Hentai.
Yeah, hentai.
I think hentai.
Pronunciation. Let's see what the almighty AI. Hentai. Oh wait, it's hen and then tie, like necktie. Hentai.
Hentai. How big of a difference? This is an easy one, like a spitball question, but anyway, I'll just say it. How big of a difference there was between the 80s and the 90s horror scene?
I would say that two differences that come to mind are with the 80s, horror was still a bit of the redheaded stepchild. You had movies that did really well, and of course that became franchises, and the horror community obviously really responded because horror almost always does well because it can be made for a low budget, and the response is very positive. So you can almost, not always, but very consistently, horror movies make their money back, if not make a profit. But I would say the 80s, that was sort of the zenith of practical effects and creativity and a certain, trends like slashers and so on and so forth. When you get to the 90s, studios were still a little gun shy in the first half, calling things horror. They sort of picked up on the fact that you can call something thriller and still have horror elements on it, but you could sell it to a larger audience. Silence of the Lambs is like a perfect example. But in the second half, I would say horror kind of got the spotlight. And you could argue that a lot of these sort of post-Scream movies are only borderline horror. I Know What You Did Last Summer, Disturbing Behavior, The Craft. These movies are just sort of, sure, there's horror elements in them, but I wouldn't necessarily call them an out-and-out horror movie. Scream, I would. But I would just say collectively, my point is that these were marketed as just, pop culture movies featuring your friends from Dawson's Creek and Monica from Friends, running from slashers. But they really invited the mainstream audience in to have a thrill ride at the movies. And so I think horror became much more acceptable by the studio perspective in terms of money makers and selling them, and it became very trendy. There was still a steady stream of indies and straight to video and Stephen King adaptations and whatnot.
Oh yeah.
That you could comfortably call horror and sell it, and people will come. Although Stephen King, kind of was in like horror movie jail at a certain point, and moved to TV and TV movies where he was doing really well. But cinematically, he was sort of out of favor for a little while there in the '90s. And I think people forget that because he's been around so much, and they've remade adaptations multiple times at this point. So anyway, I would say that's kind of a key difference, is that the way horror was accepted by the mainstream versus the horror fans was kind of different. But I think also in the 90s, you also have a key difference. I mentioned practical effects at their zenith in the 80s. In the 90s, CG really was marking its territory, because it started with baby steps, but then it was running before it could fully walk. And next thing you know, CG is in practically every movie because it's available to producers wanting to have Jurassic Park style effects, but only paying half the money for it. And so mixed results. Either way, that kind of defined the decade in terms of the perceived quality and the memory of these movies. And, you get a movie like Anaconda, which I rewatched recently, and I was highly entertained. But a lot of people remember only bad CG, which was a very, very oil and water mix between lots of practical effects and the world's largest Anaconda practical effect. But that looked very real and really good. But, that's mixed with a lot of fast moving people getting squeezed out by the Anaconda. And boy, that does not age well at all. But no. I mean, I like to add one thing, is that, when you're watching the movie just to sit down and focus on the entire movie, in context of what's going on and the action and the excitement and the thrills, you just sort of go with it because that's what you're given, and you like everything else. So you don't discount the entire movie because of, select scenes of bad, CGI that didn't age well. And you have to remember that when we watched that movie first run in the 90s, you probably didn't even realize that it was CG. You just said, wow, it's just cool and exciting. And, it's only to the trained eye and to the advances of the technology that we could, single it out. But I'll always go back to, Ray Harryhausen and watching stop motion animation.
The classic stuff.
Yeah, well, you call it a classic because it is a classic. And you go back to Jason and the Argonauts and the Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, and the last movie he did, Clash of the Titans in '82. You could even go to Empire Strikes Back and stop motion Tauntauns.
Yeah.
No one dismisses Empire Strikes Back
and
because
the at-ats.
Yeah. Well, but, yeah, no one goes back to that movie and then which just turned 45 and dismisses it because of crappy special effects that are dated. Right? So it's all context and appreciation and understanding that it's a time capsule for the technology of the era. And if anything, it should be lauded for the breakthroughs it was making at the time.
Excellent. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing Paul W.S. Anderson talk about one of my favorite horror films, which I saw promoted on social media. Yes, Event Horizon. Oh man,
Event Horizon is. I don't know if you saw that in the theater when it first came out, but I did. And wow, talk about having the rug pulled out from under you. I think they sold it as Infinite Space, Infinite Terror on one of the better posters that didn't have a bunch of photoshopped faces on it that showed the ship, the Event Horizon.
Oh yeah, those days people had the faces, like a collage of faces,
A lot, like the most boring posters in the history of yawning.
like Spear.
But I do have to say that I knew that they were sort of selling it as a horror movie, but I figured I didn't know what I was in for. I just wanted to. It looked amazing, amazing production design. Was what really lured me in. And I remember watching that movie, not expecting the movie to literally go to fucking hell.
Yeah. Well, there was I heard a few infamous scenes that was removed, which I saw a glimpse of, when they had the whatever the recording, the video log, and
Right.
This is definitely hell in space.
Yeah. I personally think, for me at least, especially after I did a rewatch after many years, I do actually like the less is more approach. I mean, yeah, they shot a lot more footage, but I think it would have gotten old quick if it was like a live action rendition of a Hieronymus Bosch, hellscape,
Well, it definitely was more Hellraiser in space than Bloodlines.
Absolutely. Another movie that came out in 95, 96. So yeah,
probably, yeah.
Well, listen, we have Doug Bradley along for the ride, so you might get
good old Doug.
You might get a little insight into Hellraiser 4.
I'm looking forward to that, definitely. Okay, with Sinners becoming a breakout success, along with Final Destination Bloodlines, box office take, do you feel that there is more room for horror in the world where cinema is saturated with superhero movies?
Yeah, absolutely. Horror, it's like a steady stream of really great content, and even the really average content is really good these days. And so I think you can get more mileage out of available technology, and it all comes down to so you get really good production values, but it all comes down to, is it a good story? Sinners, by the way, phenomenal movie, one of the best of the year, in my opinion, and it's so rewarding watching a movie that you have high hopes for over delivering on your expectations. But that movie has among many influences on wearing it on its sleeve. It owes a lot to From Dusk Till Dawn. But it's such a great film, and I haven't seen Bloodlines yet. I want to see it, but I'm too busy right now.
Yeah, I'm curious. I never even got to see what is that thing, Thunderbolts, yet.
Oh yeah, that's a fun one. But it's there will always be room for horror, and I would call Bloodline, Sinners, I think is definitely an anomaly, because it is an original film that's doing extremely well at the box office. Bloodlines, on the other hand, is the first
franchise,
first in the 25 years for the Final Destination franchise. But that doing so well, Hollywood is all about trends. And so, they're making these movies and they're putting them out, and they probably, like Smile 2 and, things like that. They expect to pull in, if they're lucky, 30, 40, 50 million, and they're still pulling out a profit, because a lot of these movies are only made for 20, 25 million. Even if a moderate budget, it's still about 20, 25 million dollars. But if it could pull in 30, 40, 50 million, that's why, that's sort of the Blumhouse model, like Megan and things like that. Anyway, my point is that I think Hollywood will look at something like Bloodlines, and just their takeaway will be, dormant franchise that people missed from the early 2000s. Let's what else can we mine? But they're gonna, more people at the studios are like, horror will do very well at the box office if you play your cards right. There's always articles about, is horror back? And anyone who loves horror and follows horror and watches horror will say horror has never left. There's a steady stream. There are amazing streaming channels like Shudder devoted to horror and
Definitely.
original programming. Even on Netflix and on Amazon, they'll debut horror that you haven't seen in theaters, and there's an audience for it, and they do well. And it's for the reasons I mentioned. You could do it more often than not for a lower budget and get a great return on it. So it never went anywhere. If for those in the mainstream who all of a sudden prick up their ears and say, "Oh wow, Final Destinations, who knew? I never even heard of that franchise. What's that?" All of us in the horror section of the theater are giggling to ourselves. It's like, well, welcome to the party, pal. This stuff's great, and I'm glad more people are discovering it.
Great. And I know some would say, oh, Bloodlines is nostalgia bait, but however, I'm just happy to see Todd, I guess, make his final appearance.
Todd's final appearance. Yeah, yep. We full disclosure, we were talking to Tony Todd to get him in Search of Darkness 90 to 94 to talk about Candyman and talk about Night of the Living Dead remake, Savini's amazing remake.
One of the best remakes.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's one of the standout remakes that's not a bad remake. It's really good. I return to it all the time. Around Halloween, it's sort of my ingratiate into Halloween mode horror watching. But we were talking to unfortunately Tony was unable to be in Search of Darkness 90s, but it was not for lack of trying and not for his lack of wanting to be in it. He wanted to be in it and agreed to be in it, but sadly, at the time, we wanted to keep his wishes private, and even us at the time didn't know exactly what was going on. We just knew that he was sick. So Tony loved the fans and loved the horror community, would spend hours at like a Monster Palooza talking to people in line, not just signing, but like having conversations with them. And, he was a horror, he was an actor with a capital A for all different genres. But horror, of course, was his bread and butter, gone too soon, and we all miss Tony Todd.
Wow, you read my mind. I was about to say that, gone too soon. He's an icon. Done so many movies, even like the low budget ones like Sabotage that I appreciated. And I followed him on back then when it was called Twitter. All right, let's try two more.
Okay.
You have featured numerous actors and filmmakers in your documentaries. Could you please share, if possible, which individuals you tried to enlist, but for one reason or another were unable to due to logistics or scheduling conflicts?
Yeah.
It's fine.
Okay. Well, I don't really like to name the people who didn't become part of this, because they're, sometimes it's scheduling, sometimes they're hard to reach, sometimes they have publicists and they have managers and they have agents that don't quite get it the way even the actors themselves, if you just ask them to do it, they would say absolutely yes. So I don't like to single out anyone specifically.
No, definitely not. I get it.
But I'll say this, gosh, if we could have everyone we wanted, we would absolutely do it. But at a certain point, we would have to draw the line anyway, just due to the limitations of budget and time and scheduling. We just can't get everybody. And there are always people that I really wanted, who would be available even and would say yes. And in the past have said yes, but the timing was wrong. But unfortunately, we just can't accommodate all the people that we would like and all the people that we've tried to. So what we ultimately end up with, we're very, very pleased and proud to have as our roster each and every time. But by all means, if they are not in an In Search of Darkness movie yet, I guarantee you it's not for lack of trying.
I just want to give like a perspective in terms of, filmmaking and creating this documentary and the challenges that it presents, which of course includes getting certain celebrities or filmmakers and personalities.
Yeah, well, I mean, I could just tell you, I could tell you a little bit about the process of that, and the process of that is quite difficult. It's a long.
I can imagine.
I kind of touched on it a little bit. Oftentimes you're talking to representatives whose job it is to kind of filter out requests, and if it's not a on camera TV role or movie role or similar to that, and it's just an interview ask, oftentimes the mindset is, well, they're currently promoting X, Y, and Z, and by way of the studio circuit or whatever, the production company, they'll talk for that. But a lot of folks, there have been folks who I will not name, where we talked to the manager, and the manager said, well, my client is not looking backwards, they're only looking forwards. They don't care. Listen, we care, that our audience cares, but,
yes.
but they don't care unless I'm dangling $100,000 for an hour sit down. They're just not going to be, they're not even going to pass it along to their client, because it doesn't reflect their representative's capability of making them money, which is the whole point of them representing them.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, if you talk to managers versus, say, a publicist or an agent, oftentimes the managers are a little more dialed into the overall holistic representation of their client, where they're like, well, even though this isn't promoting a new project that they have, it's a good profile for them to be part of this collective talking about, a decade. Some people will recognize that and say, well, yeah, absolutely, I'd love to have them be part of this. This sounds fun, and I'll talk about like horror, some recent ones that I did not expect them to say yes, and they said, by all means, absolutely. When do I get to sit down? Two of those were Corbin Burnson, talking for In Search of Darkness 95 to 99, to talk about The Dentist and to talk about Tales from the Hood.
Yes.
Yeah, I talked to Corbin before the interview after his reps passed it along, and he's like, yeah. And I coordinated the sit down with Corbin himself to saying, when's the best time, when are you available? And he wrote me this nice little thing saying, I'm so excited to go down the dark memory lane of some of these movies that I did in the 90s. And that to me is that's like music to my ears, that he's like not being strong-armed to sit down to do this. He's like, yeah, are you kidding me? When do I get to sit down and talk? And he was a great sit down and really super nice guy. And another one was Steven Weber. Yeah, Steven Weber, known to most for Wings and a lot of his non-horror work, but of course he was in the Shining miniseries as Jack Torrance himself. The Stephen King, the Mick Garris directed Stephen King, written Stephen King being on set practically every day, because that was his answer to Kubrick's The Shining, which he did not like because it was an aberration of his novel that he took so personally. So getting Steven Weber to sit down and talk about the Shining miniseries, to talk about Dracula, Dead and Loving It, Mel Brooks, and just he being a monster kid growing up loving this stuff, but he's just not known for that. He even did the audio book for Stephen King's It. Audio book for a 1,000-page book is nothing to sneeze at, so he was like, yeah, sign me up, coach. Can't wait to be there. Mike Flanagan, sign me up, coach. Let's talk about this. Kayla Cooper, the writer of Megan, the Megan movies, and the Nun 2, and
I definitely loved the first Megan.
I was able to, by hook and by crook, email her directly. She responded in like 5 minutes saying, "Hells yeah, I want to be in this." See Robert Cargill, the screenwriter for
Doctor Strange and Black Phone, who is Ain't It Cool News. I remember him.
There you go. He's like, hells yeah, I'll be there. And then when we were talking, because he's going to be in this next one, he said, off the record, I not off the record. He said, to be frank, I wanted to let you know I've been waiting for you to ask me to do this, and I kept on saying every time you put out an In Search of Darkness movie, why isn't he asking me? So I finally got around to asking him, and I said, well, apologies, better late than never. And he said, no, man, I'm here to do it. We had a long talk, and when we were done, he's like, if you need me to come back and do more, I'm happy to do it. So it's for all the celebrities who and talent and filmmakers who were unable to get, or our schedules don't align, like I now see you got me on a tear, and then we'll wrap it up. But like Tom Savini, I couldn't get him for the first one. Robert Englund, I couldn't get him for the first one. But In Search of Darkness Part 2 they both, once I did lock them down, they're like, why wasn't I in the first?
Okay,
I'm like, guys, it was not for lack of trying.
All right. Okay, this is and thanks for being so gracious, for answering, a few tough questions.
Yeah, and then don't take it personally. But
no, of course I don't. I'm just happy to actually talk to you again. It's been a few years, and shooting this shit, chopping up game. About one final question.
All right.
What other projects you have lined up after the second installment of ISOD 90s? Are you planning a sequel to In Search of Tomorrow, or that one is a one and done? Actually, that's one of my favorites, In Search of Tomorrow.
Thank you. Currently in production, I am executive producing The Thing Expanded. So I executive produced The Aliens Expanded.
Yes.
Excuse me. All right, I'm burping now. I think I when I took a drink of water, took more air than water. All right. But I executive produced In Search. Aliens Expanded. And now we're currently doing The Thing Expanded, and we have things in the works that we can't announce because nothing is set in stone. I'm pretty deep into production on In Search of Darkness 95 and 99. We wanted to do another In Search of Tomorrow, and we had announced that we were going to do In Search of Tomorrow Part 2, which would have been more 80s sci-fi, but a lot more of the deep cuts. But unfortunately, we did not get enough momentum with that in terms of we can't just say we're going to do it and then do it. This is a more, not including the development of the project. It's a year out of our
fundraising and everything like that.
Yeah, it's a year commitment at the very least. And if we don't have enough literal support that we can identify, and we usually do that by way of a combination of social media response, but more importantly, the surveys that we do, and the amount of people who respond to the survey, because we really need a minimum amount of people to respond to the survey. Even if we have a couple hundred who say, this is great, you've got to do this, it's really got to be a considerably bigger amount to make us say, is this a financially viable project to embark on? And so sadly, well, I'm not going to say it's never going to happen, but at least the timing for In Search of Tomorrow just was not right. And the cry for 90s horror was way more deafening than In Search of Tomorrow,
really?
a follow-up to that. Well, yeah, I'm being pretty candid about that. And the thing is, I don't think there's any less, but I think it's harder to marshal the sci-fi community compared to the horror community.
Yes,
horror community is very involved and very vocal and very much more integrated and proactive, whereas the sci-fi one is really all over the map.
It's kind of niche.
Yeah, like you could say, well, Star Wars or Dune or
Blade Runner.
or Blade, whatever you want to call it. Even The Thing, for example, but the thing is, taking one specific, or Aliens, you're taking one specific core group where there is a large number of people who are very supportive and collectors and really into it, and pour over these things like with a fine tooth comb, who always want more. They're absolute completists when it comes to these movies, and very passionate. And but if you take, for some reason, if you take sci-fi as a whole, it's more like factions versus a unified community, in terms of saying, yes, we want your documentary. So sci-fi is not out, of the question in the future. But a big key to that puzzle is figuring out how to engage the sci-fi audience collectively to show their support and kind of commit to a certain degree. Part of the survey is like, there's no obligation when you fill out the survey. You could just be like, yeah, this is what I want, or not do it. But if you fill out the survey, you're not obligated to buy anything or invest in any of these projects. But we do ask a question, like, would you get this, and how much would you pay? And it could be anything. It'd be like, I'd only pay $10, or I'd only pay a nickel, and it's not worth anything else. But or I'll wait till streaming. So I'm not going to pay for it, but I'll see it when it's done, and I can find it somewhere else if I can find it somewhere else.
Yes.
But all these things are considerations in this day and age of the internet and streaming and physical media versus piracy. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So everyone's perspective in terms of supporting projects and supporting indie filmmaking and supporting filmmakers consistently, which we have many people who do that, and we're incredibly grateful, because we would not be here making these documentaries if it weren't for you guys. So that being said, it comes down to, what are we making next? I can't quite say. We're leaning in one way or another, but we're really kind of deep in these two current projects to really sort of get to. It probably won't be till the end of this year that we really sort of start committing to what happens next.
Right. Excellent.
Behind the scenes. Behind the scenes.
Excellent answer. And I still remember, in regards to the debate between physical and digital media. With physical media, like you said, it's yours. You get to play it or use it whenever you want, instead of, streaming rights will expire eventually.
Absolutely. I came up with a little goofy saying. I say, streaming is fleeting, physical is forever. And you could look directly at In Search of Darkness. That was on Shudder, part 1, part 2, part 3. Mm-hmm. And so people say, oh, cool, so I'll go watch it there. And you see that there's only In Search of Darkness 3 on there. 1 is gone, and then 2 left, and 3 will leave soon too. Because they're only licensed for a certain amount of years to be streamed. And will they go back on Shudder? I don't know. Ask Shudder. If you want it back on Shudder, all of them, you gotta campaign with Shudder, because we could say we'd love to give it to you again, but they're not going to do it.
Well, just buy the damn copies.
Well, that's the thing. Thank you very much.
Support indie filmmakers.
There you go. Well, a lot of people don't necessarily have in today's day and age, as you know, people don't think that way. There are people who believe in supporting indie filmmakers, indie projects, and then they complain when there's nothing new and unique, and all they get is surefire, stuff from the studios that feels like it's regurgitated. But if you got to put your money where your mouth is. You got to vote with your dollar. And if you want to see more of this stuff, or if you see something's being made, or if you see something in the theater that you say, wow, that's a totally original title, don't say, well, I've never heard of that, so I'll just wait for it later. No, you got to support it when it's in the theaters. Sinners is like an ideal example of just like, it's a untested title. Sure, you could say it's made by the collaborator with Michael B. Jordan, and Michael B. Jordan's in it ×2, and Ryan Coogler, Black Panther director, is doing it. It's got an insanely amazing pedigree, yet it's still like, well, when I first saw that first trailer for Sinners, I did not, of course, I don't like to watch trailers because I don't want to give things away.
Yeah, it gives it away pretty much.
But I do watch a good piece of the trailer, because if I've never heard of it, I don't know what it is, and I'm intrigued, I will watch enough just to say, am I interested in this? And then I'll close my eyes and ears and go la 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 la. But I did that with Sinners. And I got to the point because I was intrigued, like, what's this? This is really interesting. This period piece about gangsters gun running in the South, in that era. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting enough just for that. But then all of a sudden, bang! There's like freaking vampires. I'm like, oh, that's when I started going la 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 la, because I'm like, I knew that moment that I went from beyond intrigue to I will be there opening weekend. Now I don't want to know anything else because it's going to spoil it all.
Right. Well, Dave, as always, it's been a lot of fun. I'm very happy to do this once again. And of course, for those who are listening, I'm
just going to step in. Go to 90shorrordoc.com.
90s horror, yes, horror.
Yes, well, all of our socials are 80s horror doc. That hasn't changed, and so that'll definitely throw you, because if you want to find out all about this stuff, go to Instagram, go to Facebook, go to Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at 80s horror doc, 80s. But if you want to go pre-order this now, between now and June 9th, go to 90shorrordoc.com, and that's where you can pre-order your copy.
Excellent. Perfect. Thanks, Dave. You're the man.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a little technical hiccup in the beginning, but here we are. We got to have a nice, robust chat about hangers and hentai. I wouldn't want to talk about that stuff with anyone else.
So I'm looking forward to the final installment. I have my own expectations, but I'll keep mum on that. I hope to see. But you take care of yourself, brother.
All right.
Till next time.
Till next time.